The Battle of Steel. A question that has no simple answer. There is something deeply human about the fascination with metal. Long before the age of computers, satellites, or synthetic materials. Long before we had words like alloy or molecular structure, our ancestors looked at a piece of raw earth, pulled from the ground, and somehow understood that inside that rough, dull, unremarkable stone, there was something extraordinary, waiting to be born. They built fires. They hammered. They sweated over coals for hours, sometimes days, and what came out of that process was not just a tool or a weapon. It was a statement. A declaration that human ingenuity could take what nature offered and transform it into something entirely new. That story, the story of metal, is one of the longest and most complex narratives in human history. And at the center of that story, standing like two ancient rivals in an unfinished duel, are two names that still ignite debate among blacksmiths, collectors, chefs, historians, and survivalists alike. Damascus steel and iron. Or, more precisely, Damascus steel and the iron-based materials that came before, alongside, and eventually after it. But here is where the story gets interesting, and where most people get it wrong from the very beginning. When someone asks whether Damascus steel beats iron in a battle of materials, the question contains a hidden flaw. A misconception. Baked right into its core. Because Damascus is not a fundamentally different material from iron. Damascus steel is iron. More specifically, it is a form of steel, which is itself a form of iron. Iron with carbon added. Iron that has been pushed, folded, manipulated, and refined into something that transcends its original form. So when people pit Damascus against iron, they are not really comparing two separate substances. They are comparing two different philosophies of metalworking. Two different answers to the same ancient question: how do you take this common element and make it extraordinary? To truly understand the battle, you need to go back. Far back. Further than most people think to look. Iron itself has been known to humanity for an almost incomprehensible length of time. The earliest iron artifacts found by archaeologists date back to roughly 3500 BCE, and these were not smelted iron. They were meteoric iron, metal that fell from the sky, already partially processed by the unimaginable heat of atmospheric entry. Ancient Egyptians called it metal from heaven, and the reverence embedded in that phrase tells you everything you need to know about how people related to this material. It was not just a resource. It was something almost sacred. The problem with pure iron, and this is crucial to understanding everything that follows, is that it is, in practical terms, almost useless as a cutting or combat material. Pure iron is soft. Remarkably, almost frustratingly soft for a metal. It bends. It deforms under pressure. It will not hold an edge. A blade made from pure iron will cut, but it will not stay sharp for long, and under serious stress, it will fold rather than hold firm. For thousands of years, this was simply accepted as the nature of iron. Craftsmen worked around it. They used it for tools where hardness mattered less, for structural elements, for decorative pieces. But as a cutting edge, as a weapon capable of surviving real combat, pure iron falls short almost immediately. And yet, iron everywhere. It is the fourth most abundant element in the Earth's crust by mass. Pulling it from the ground was not the challenge. The challenge was making it behave the way humans needed it to behave. The discovery of steel, iron combined deliberately with carbon, changed everything. And the story of how that discovery happened is not clean or linear. It did not occur in one place, at one moment, with one inventor who could take credit. It happened gradually, in different cultures, across different centuries, as metalworkers noticed that certain combinations of iron ore, certain charcoal types, certain temperatures, certain hammering techniques, produced metal that was harder, that held an edge, that did not bend when it should hold firm. Carbon is the magic ingredient, and the relationship between iron and carbon is one of chemistry's most elegant partnerships. Add too little carbon and your steel is soft, nearly indistinguishable from pure iron in practical use. Add too much carbon and you get a material that is but brittle, a blade that might shatter under lateral stress rather than flex. The ideal range, the narrow corridor where steel becomes something genuinely remarkable, sits between approximately 0.6 and 1.5% carbon by weight. Within that range, the microstructure of the metal changes in ways that give it both hardness and a degree of toughness that pure iron could never achieve. This is the foundation on which every great steelmaking tradition was built. No tradition built more impressively on that
edge will hold for a
foundation, or more mysteriously, than the one that produced what we now call Damascus steel. The origins of Damascus steel are themselves something of a historical puzzle, and part of what makes the material so enduringly fascinating is the mythology that has grown up around, like vines around a stone wall. The blade you could flex almost double and watch snap back to perfect straightness, the edge sharp enough to split a falling silk scarf, the surface marked with swirling, ghostly patterns that looked like flowing water frozen in metal. These stories circulated across the medieval world with the insistence of things that must be true, because they were simply too specific and too consistent to be pure invention. What the historical evidence suggests, and what materials scientists have confirmed through modern analysis, is that the original Damascus blades of the medieval period were not made by the technique most people associate with the name today. The legendary blades of the Crusader era were made from a material called woods steel, sometimes spelled Wutz, which originated in the Indian subcontinent, possibly as early as 300 BCE. Wutz was a crucible steel, meaning it was produced by melting iron and carbon together
say these blades are blessed
in a sealed
by the
crucible at
themselves.
Extremely high temperatures,
See
allowing
how the
the
light dances on the
carbon
water
to distribute through the iron in ways that simple forge welding could never achieve. The result of this crucible process was a steel with a very high carbon content, somewhere in the range of 1 to 2%, that would normally produce a brittle, unreliable blade. But the specific combination of raw materials used in Wutz production, the particular iron ores from specific Indian deposits, combined with particular organic materials that introduce trace elements like vanadium, tungsten, and molybdenum into the mix, created a microstructure unlike anything else being produced anywhere in the world at the time. Under a microscope, or even under careful visual inspection. After acid etching, Wutz steel reveals bands of material with varying carbon concentration. Areas rich in a hard iron carbide compound called cementite, alternating with softer, more flexible zones of iron with less carbon. This banded structure, this layered architecture built at the microscopic level, gave Wutz blades a combination of properties that seemed almost contradictory to Observers who had never seen anything like it. Hard enough to hold an extraordinary edge, flexible enough to absorb shock without shattering. The wavy surface patterns that appeared after acid treatment were not decorative additions. They were a direct visual expression of the internal microstructure, the carbide bands, showing themselves on the surface like the grain in fine wood. Metallurgists in the 20th and 21st centuries who studied authentic wood blades, some preserved in museum collections, some unearthed in archaeological sites, found something even more remarkable inside the metal. Carbon nanotubes. These are cylindrical structures made entirely of carbon atoms, arranged in a hexagonal lattice, with mechanical properties that modern materials science considers exceptional. The fact that medieval Indian and Persian smiths, without electron microscopes, without materials science education, without any conceptual framework for what a nanotube even is, managed to produce these structures through purely empirical, traditional methods is one of the more quietly astonishing facts in the history of technology. The wood steel made its way westward through trade routes, arriving in Persia, traveling through the Middle East, eventually reaching Europe through the port city of Damascus in Syria. This is the most commonly accepted explanation for the name, though some scholars argue for alternative etymologies, suggesting the name may derive from an Arabic word meaning water, in reference to the flowing visual patterns on the blade surface. Whatever the true origin of the name, Damascus became the word that stuck, and it carried with it an almost supernatural reputation that persisted for centuries. Crusader knights who encountered Damascus steel blades in combat came back with story that bordered on the mythological. A Damascus blade could cut through a European iron sword. It could slice through armor that should have stopped it. It would not break when struck against stone. These accounts, written down and repeated across Europe, built a legend that made Damascus steel the most sought-after cutting material in the world for several centuries. And then, sometime in the 18th century, the secret died. This is the great unsolved mystery of metallurgical history. The production of authentic wood steel, the crucible process that created the internal structure, the nanotubes, the carbide banding, simply stopped. The specific Indian iron ore deposits that provide the trace elements critical to the process were either exhausted or fell out of use. The smiths who carried the knowledge in their hands, and their experience, the tacit knowledge that cannot be fully captured in written instructions, passed away without adequate transmission to the next generation. The trade routes changed. The demand shifted. And within a few generations, the ability to make what had been the finest steel in the world was simply gone. What remained was the name and the aesthetic. The wavy patterns. The visual signature of something layered and folded. And so a different technique, already practiced by smiths in various traditions, began to carry the Damascus label. This technique is pattern welding, sometimes called forge welding or lamination. It involves taking two or more different types of steel, typically a harder, higher carbon steel and a softer, more flexible one, heating them together, hammering them until they weld into a single piece, folding that piece over itself, heating and hammering again. Repeating this process many times until the metal contains hundreds or even thousands of alternating layers. When this layered billet is then cut, twisted, or otherwise manipulated before the final forging into a blade shape, and when the finished blade is treated with an acid etch that reacts differently to the high carbon and low carbon layers, the surface reveals the characteristic swirling, flowing patterns that everyone recognizes as Damascus. The look is genuinely beautiful. There is a reason why Damascus pattern knives command premium prices and are displayed as art objects. A well-executed Damascus blade looks like it contains something alive inside the metal, something that shifts and moves when the light catches it from different angles. But here is the honest truth that any serious bladesmith or materials engineer will tell you, and it is a truth that sometimes upsets people who have built emotional or financial investment in the Damascus mystique. Modern pattern-welded Damascus steel does not generally outperform modern high-performance monosteel alloys in practical cutting tests. The lamination process that creates the beautiful patterns does not, by itself, create the internal microstructure that gave authentic woods its legendary properties. What you get with most modern Damascus is a blend of the properties of the steels being combined, which may actually produce a blade that is less specialized and therefore less optimal than a blade made from a single, carefully engineered alloy. This is not to diminish the craft or the artistry of Damascus blade making. It is genuinely skilled work, genuinely beautiful, and genuinely meaningful as a craft tradition. But in a direct performance comparison against the best modern steel alloys, a Damascus blade typically loses. And this brings us to the third contestant in our extended battle. The one that most people forget to include when they imagine a face-off between ancient techniques. The modern high-performance steel alloys that have been developed over the last century represent, in purely functional terms, the most capable cutting materials ever produced by human beings. Consider what modern metallurgy has achieved. Steels like CPM S35VN, developed through a powder metallurgy process that allows for an extraordinarily uniform distribution of carbide particles throughout the steel matrix, offer a combination of edge retention, toughness, and corrosion resistance that would have seemed like fantasy to any medieval smith. The CPM process, crucible particle metallurgy, named for the Crucible Steel company that developed it, involves melting the steel alloy and then spraying it as molten droplets through a nitrogen atmosphere. These droplets solidify almost instantaneously into tiny spheres of perfectly mixed steel powder. This powder is then compressed under enormous pressure and sintered into a solid billet. The advantage of this process is that it eliminates the segregation problem that plagues conventionally cast steels, the tendency of different alloying elements to separate during solidification and create regions of inconsistent composition.
The heat treatment on this blade is exquisite.
Powder metallurgy steel, every cubic millimeter of the finish
highlights the layers
billet has essentially the same composition as every other cubic
The
millimeter.
deployment on this is incredibly
The result
smooth,
is a
and the
steel with a
carbon fiber is
consistency that no
flawless.
amount of traditional forging skill could achieve. Steels like Baller M390, developed in Austria specifically for high-end cutlery, add high levels of chromium for stainless properties, along with vanadium, tungsten, and molybdenum to create carbide particles that are extremely hard and uniformly distributed. A properly heat-treated M390 blade will hold a working edge through tasks that would leave a Damascus blade visibly dulled. In standardized edge retention tests, cutting media like hemp rope or cardboard while monitoring the force required to maintain a consistent cut, M390 and similar steels consistently outperform handmade Damascus by significant margins. This performance advantage is not magic or marketing, it is the direct result of a century of systematic scientific investigation into the relationships between steel composition, heat treatment, and mechanical properties. Modern metallurgists know exactly why their steels perform the way they do. They can predict performance from composition before the steel is even made. They can optimize heat treatment protocols, the precise temperatures and cooling rates that determine the final microstructure, to within fractions of a degree. The gap between what medieval smiths were doing empirically and what modern engineers do systematically is, in practical terms, enormous. And yet, and this is the part of the story that refuses to resolve itself neatly into a simple winner and a clear loser, none of that performance data answers the question that actually matters to most people who are drawn to Damascus steel in the first place. Because most people who seek out a Damascus blade are not running standardized edge retention tests. They are not cutting hemp rope while measuring force curves. They are holding something in their hands and feeling something, a connection to a tradition, an appreciation for the work of a skilled human being, an aesthetic pleasure in the patterns on the surface, that no performance metric can capture or replace. A Damascus blade tells a story. It carries visible evidence of the process that created it. The patterns on the surface are not decorations applied after the fact. They are the truth of the metal, the record of what the smith did, written in iron and carbon and the chemistry of acid. There is a reason why, in the age of CNC machining and industrial production, when a factory can produce 1,000 identical blades in the time a smith takes to make one, people still seek out handmade Damascus knives and are willing to pay substantial premiums for them. It is not irrationality. It is a recognition that objects can carry meaning beyond their functional specifications, that a beautiful, handmade thing connects its owner to something larger than utility, to craft, to history, to the long human story of metal and fire. And pure iron, the original, the ancestor, the material that started it all. In a strictly practical modern context, it loses the battle before it begins. Iron, as has been understood for centuries, simply cannot do what steel does. It cannot hold an edge. It cannot maintain structural integrity under serious stress. No contemporary bladesmith works in pure iron because there is simply no reason to. The advantages of adding carbon are too well established, too thoroughly proven, too fundamental to the very concept of what a useful blade is supposed to be. But iron carries its own kind of dignity in the story. Every Damascus blade in existence is mostly iron. Every high-performance modern alloy is built on an iron foundation. The chromium, vanadium, tungsten, molybdenum, all the sophisticated additions of modern metallurgy, are additions to iron. Modifications of iron. Iron remains the base, the foundation, the essential material without which nothing else in this story exists. So who wins the battle of steel? The answer, like the patterns on a Damascus blade, depends entirely on how the light falls when you look at it. If you need a blade that will outperform everything else in pure functional terms, that will hold an edge through demanding work and resist corrosion and survive years of hard use, the modern alloys win without serious contest. The engineering behind them is simply too advanced, too systematic, too empirically validated to be overcome by traditional handcraft alone. If you need a blade that will live on a display stand or in a leather-wrapped box, that will be handed to someone as a gift and kept for decades as a piece of personal history, that will catch the light in a way that makes people stop and look and ask questions. Damascus wins in every dimension that matters. Its beauty is real. Its craft is real. the skill required to produce it is real. And the emotional resonance it carries, the sense of connection to a tradition stretching back through centuries of fire and iron and human ingenuity, is as real as anything that can be measured in a laboratory. Pure iron, the quiet ancestor in this story, does not win any practical battle today. But it deserves to be remembered not as a failure, not as a primitive stepping stone, but as the beginning of everything. The raw material from which all of this emerged. The sky metal that ancient Egyptians touched with reverence. The element that, when humans learned to add carbon to it and control its transformation with heat and hammer, gave rise to one of the most enduring and consequential technologies in the history of civilization. The Battle of Steel has no single winner. What it has, is a story long enough and deep enough to reward everyone who takes the time to look closely at what the light reveals. Annalise esse texto este repetitivo, esse a informativa ou a contudo falso.